Today's presentation will dive into the textbook that was selected for the Instructional Leadership Book Response. The book that I chose for this project is by Peter M. DeWitt, entitled Instructional Leadership Creating Practice Out of Theory by Corwin Press. Dr. DeWitt is formerly an elementary teacher for about 11 years. He was also formerly a school principal for 8 years, and he currently works as a consultant teaching leadership to future leaders and current leaders, as well as coaches and mentors leaders around the country. The purpose for this book begins with bridging the gap between research and instructional leadership practice, or what's actually happening in the classroom. Second is to move beyond theory towards practical implementation of instruction in the classroom. Next is redefining instructional leadership to show the improving of learning in the classroom or the school. Next is providing leaders with usable implementation frameworks that they can then take into the classroom to improve instruction with. Another one is emphasizing evidence-based instructional improvements and using data to drive the decision-making process for how to improve instruction within the school. And last, to create a school-wide sustainable change that can be carried on indefinitely within the school. Throughout the chapters in the book, there's a heavy focus on the learning process, specifically at the classroom level. It prioritizes instruction versus management, specifically with leaders, where the leaders tend to spend a great majority of their time working with school processes as opposed to focusing on instruction or developing instruction for improvement reasons. Next is increasing visibility of administrators in the classrooms, and specifically this is in reference to administrators going into the classrooms and doing classroom observations for teacher evaluations, how they spend their time and how they should be spending their time. Next is supporting teacher development more consistently throughout the year, and also focusing the decisions that they make on student learning outcomes as opposed to school need or school objectives. Next, we have shifting from the role of the evaluator to the role of the instructional coach. So typically what we see in schools, most administrators are the evaluator who go into the classroom, evaluate the teacher, and produce the teacher's evaluation. In Texas, that would be the T-test system. More to shifting in as an instructional coach, where the administrator would go into the classroom, examine or look at what the teacher's doing in the classroom, and then make useful coaching or other comments afterwards in order to develop the teacher's instructional toolbox. And last is keeping the learning at the center of the leadership focus, especially when it comes to the mission and the vision of the school. One of the most important aspects of what the author is trying to communicate in the book is effective implementation of these processes. One of them, avoiding abandoning initiatives too early, happens all too commonly in the public school system, as we all have seen, where initiatives are proposed, implemented, and then swiftly abandoned in favor of what they've always been doing. Another one is focusing on the implementation science principles. This is how we are implementing, or the data or analysis that's used to create the principles so that they're effective and useful in the school's context. Also recognizing the implementation dip. That kind of goes a little bit back to abandoning initiatives. As the dip in the implementation occurs, we start out strong, and as we go through this process of implementation, the effort kind of lags off at the end, and no one ever goes back to kind of rekindle the fire. There's also applying program logic for planning. In other words, looking at what you're planning on doing and making sure that what you're planning fits the context of the school and the needs of the students, specifically that it's student-centered. And last, sustaining these changes through consistency in the actions that are happening with the administrators and the teachers within the classroom as they design and deliver their instruction. Another important concept being communicated in the text is the concept of collective leadership. And this is, of course, bringing everyone together in the process. Leadership is not supposed to be a one person takes the whole. It's supposed to be a shared responsibility with everybody involved. It's building trust with all of your staff, not specifically picking a department or a subject to have buy-in, but all staff need to have buy-in to the process that's being proposed or the change being proposed. It's also encouraging open lines of communication between all staff and all departments with all of the stakeholders, even between the school and the community around. It's also promoting collaborative decision making. It's not supposed to be a process where the leaders make the decisions and the teachers follow. You need to get the teachers involved in the decision-making process in order for the buy-in and in order for their voice to be made a part of the process and a part of the program. It's also engaging teachers as instructional partners. It's not supposed to be the gotcha system where the administrator or the leader goes into the classroom and that culture of gotcha creates a situation where teachers tend to do what I've called the dog and pony show. They create a lesson specifically for their observation, but the lesson is not representative of what they actually do on a daily basis. It's designed specifically to get a good T-test evaluation as opposed to teaching kids. And last, it's strengthening professional learning communities and tailoring those so that you're not creating a PLC for everybody. You're creating PLC specifically department by department so that everyone's getting something tailored to their needs and something that's very user-friendly and will create positive student outcomes. Another important concept that DeWitt brings across in this book is evidence-based leadership, which basically is focused on creating decisions based on classroom evidence that's data-driven, not simply going in and making observations, but collecting data and making your decisions based on that data. It's analyzing the students' learning data. It's conducting meaningful classroom observations, not simply walking into the classroom and making observations for T-tests, but creating observations that will then come back as good revisions to the designing and delivery of instruction within the classroom to produce more successful student outcomes. It's also reflecting continuously on learning outcomes that are happening within each classroom, not simply the department as a whole or a department as a whole, but classroom by classroom, looking at each teacher and examining what's best for each teacher's class so that there's the maximum amount of success possible from those learning outcomes that are designed. It's also adjusting instruction using specific evidence that's collected as opposed to just adjusting instruction because of what the teacher or the administrator thinks should be happening. It should be a data-driven evidence, data-driven process. And lastly, it's measuring the impact as opposed to simply having an activity. If you have an activity, that's one thing to consider. However, what's the impact of that activity and what data can you collect to prove the outcome as the more important piece of evidence used to create the process of change? And ultimately, the implications for leadership based on what DeWitt brings across in this book begins with really reallocating time towards instruction, focusing all the leadership's effort and time on instruction as opposed to, or simply trying to put aside some of, what leaders typically have to do on a daily basis with infrastructure and dynamics and organizational type leadership. Next is modeling continuous professional learning to the teachers and the staff so that they're aware of what this looks like and what the expectations are, or what they're expected to perform at, what level, as opposed to simply them creating that expectation on their own. In other words, this is what I think my administrator wants. We as administrators need to present that to the teachers in the beginning of the year and model that throughout the year so they're well aware of what they should be producing in terms of not only the design and delivery of their instruction, but also the data that we're collecting from students based on common assessments and other forms of evidence. It's also listening actively to your teachers, not only in PLCs or other professional development opportunities, but also one-on-one during individual meeting times. It's building this through consistency of your actions as well as through consistency of programs that are implemented within the school. And finally, it's fostering this culture of continuous improvement that will lead to long-term sustainable success within the school. The next part of what DeWitt is trying to bring across in the textbook is what this looks like, or what these processes look like in practice, or application in practice. It starts by the leaders developing a growth-centered culture within the school among all staff, not just the teachers. It also is increasing classroom engagement. And this starts with the leaders going into the classroom and modeling to the teachers what good classroom engagement looks like, and collecting the data that supports good classroom engagement taking place within the classrooms. It is also focusing on improvement priorities, specifically using your data to develop and design appropriate instruction that meets the needs of the students. Next, it's supporting intentional instructional planning. This goes back to the fact that teachers need dedicated time to put together lesson plans or to gather their instructional materials to give an authentic lesson to the students that creates positive outcomes. Next is strengthening collaboration among the staff. This is within departments and across departments. A lot of times we have our staff within a department collaborating well, but departments between each other are not having that same level of collaboration. So it's up to leadership to step in and model this and require this as one of our expectations for the school. And lastly, it's improving the long-term sustainability of our programs and our initiatives so that we have that for the school's long-term sustainable change. So what DeWitt is trying to communicate in the book for impact and expectations is first that leaders need to increase teacher ownership in the process of designing and developing their instruction, as well as implementing the programs that they're being asked within their classrooms. Second, it's improving instructional consistency. And this starts with leadership modeling and communicating expectations to the teachers at the beginning of the year and throughout the year so that they're well aware of what needs to be taking place within the classroom so that students are successful. Next, it's strengthening the collaboration across the campus, not just between departments, not just within departments, but between all staff in the school. We don't want to just focus on our teachers and ignore all the other support staff. We want everybody to be involved, and the collaboration needs to be involved across the campus in order for our initiatives to be successful and sustainable. It's also enhancing student engagement, not only within the classrooms, but within the school and the community as a whole. We need to look at what students are doing inside school, but it's also important to examine what they're doing outside school, because this has an influence as how their productivity and how their success will be in the classrooms and in the school. It also has a lot to do with improving instructional quality over time. We know where we're starting at because as we're collecting data and analyzing data over time, we can then chart where we were, where we are, and then make assumptions of where we want to be and plan how we're going to get there. And last, It's producing sustainable school improvement that will last over time and that will really impact the campus or the district as a whole. So ultimately, this textbook is a great guide for showing how instructional leadership extends beyond simple management of a school or a program. It really gets into to the depths of how leaders need to be involved in improving and developing instruction and having that be a focus as opposed to the typical organizational or operational management of a school system. It also looks in depth at collaboration strengths and school effectiveness, on the evidences that should be collected, that should be used to guide instructional decisions to create the positive outcomes our students deserve. It's developing sustainable change through requiring careful implementation of programs and procedures, and then modeling those and making sure that the teachers are doing them throughout the year consistently. It's also building trust, building buy-in, and improving communication across all departments and between departments so that everyone's on the same page within the school and everyone is aware of what they're expected to produce and that they are producing this based on the data that's ultimately collected from each teacher's students. And lastly, it's leadership ultimately improving student success through dedicating their time and their efforts to creating this instructional improvement within the classrooms, within the teachers, and within the staff, so that the school stands the best chance of producing high-quality results for the school district. And finally, we have some questions for critical thinking, discussion questions. The first being, how can leaders overcome initiative fatigue while maintaining momentum for change? And the book describes initiative fatigue essentially as after we implement an initiative, we go strong for a few weeks and then the strength begins to fade. And we want positive momentum. We want the momentum for positive change. So what processes or what procedures can take place within a school to keep initiative fatigue from taking place while still looking to maintain that positive change? Second, how can schools distinguish meaningful evidence from simply collecting more data? In other words, what evidence or how do we collect evidence that actually has an impact on our decision making as opposed to simply collecting data because we're required to collect data for specific purposes? Next, how can evidence be used to improve instruction without creating a culture of compliance? We really want to examine what specific processes or procedures can be used to create this culture without having the compliance piece come in and overshadow what we're trying to accomplish. Because ultimately that compliance typically comes down from the state level on school districts asking us to do specific types of data collection, which sometimes really doesn't improve instruction or help us with improving our instruction or positive outcomes. And last, should professional development be individualized or school-wide? And I know this discussion has been taking place a couple of times here recently, but part of what I'm asking, I think, here is, should instruction be school-wide for everyone in terms of, or in other words, all teachers get the same content, or should that content be individualized department by department, or even further down, be individualized teacher by teacher based on their classroom's outcome? I'd like to take a moment to thank you for watching my presentation today and to wish you a great afternoon.